I knew, not his diagnosis, but as soon as he was born, I had impressions that there was something wrong.
I wondered at the time if something was wrong with our boy. Yeah. They came in to me at 5 in the morning and they said, "There's trouble with your son. We're going to take him up to Primary Children's Hospital." So I immediately called him and he rushed.
She was in a separate hospital. She was at LDS Hospital where Paul was delivered, and I was up at Primary Children.
Primary Children's up the hill.
We didn't have cell phones. Communication was, when you could get a telephone.
Yeah.
And he brought Mother to stay with me, and Dad went with him. Now, I had lost a sister at 3 days of a thinning in the aorta. And so you can imagine when I learned that Paul had a heart problem, what Mother and I discussed and cried.
The elevator doors were opening just as we went inside the door, and out came a doctor and a couple of nurses and a baby in an isolette, and realized it was Paul. And so they were rushing him in for some immediate testing to try to figure out what was wrong. He was turning blue, and we did some things. It was determined within a very, very short time that he had a severe congenital heart defect, that he would have to have surgery immediately if he was to survive. And his first surgery was when he was 22 hours old. This is way back in 1973. And cardiac surgery on kids, pediatric surgery, was very, very difficult in its infancy. He survived 13 years on that initial shunt. And it was when he became 13, approximately, that he developed something was infecting his body. We didn't know what it was.
So they decided to move him to Primary Children's Hospital.
Took him by ambulance up to Primary Children's, and the doctors there started trying to figure out what it was. And they discovered that there was a walnut-sized aneurysm right on his shunt.
My understanding was that he wasn't getting blood into his lungs when he was born. And the shunt was taking the blood that comes rapidly through the body and just falling into the lungs from this shunt that they put on. Now, I may be incorrect.
And so they cut it down, and they got a mylar tube, and he wrapped that flat piece of vein around the tube like a barber pole, sutured it up, and then cut that to length and installed that adjacent to the other one that they took down. And that kept him alive for a year until he was able to have reconstructive surgery. They gave him what was called a Fontan. That was probably the most traumatic moment prior to the transplant that we had. That's how things progressed to the point where, he lives to be 36 years of age and needs a heart, and all of a sudden, even though his anatomy was so dramatically convoluted, they were able to do it. But it was not without a lot of political ruminations between doctors and hospitals and other individuals, taking some chances and doing some things that were maybe a little out of the ordinary. We didn't know how bad it was. We didn't understand, we didn't comprehend how really dramatically difficult this situation was. And so when you say we were a bit oblivious, we were...
Well, I was.
Well, and we were, so and a little bit naive. We didn't question the doctors. I know in some instances you would have a bunch of... Where do you go? You've got one pediatric cardiologist in town. You've got some pediatric surgeons, cardiovascular surgeons that we have to trust that they know what they're doing. And we did. That's what happened, and he was given an incredible heart of a young man, and he's survived. And here he is turning 50. Things have changed so dramatically during the decades that these kids are all surviving, they're living, and in many cases they're thriving. And yet, medical science and the organizations are not giving them the attention that they need in terms of medical help and assistance. I mean, these are expensive surgeries. These are incredibly delicate and expensive surgeries to keep these people going. The medical community, the government agencies responsible, the insurance industry, all of these organizations need to realize that these kids' lives are being saved, and they are now becoming adults. And some of them, like my son, is soon to turn 50 years old. This is not an anomaly. This is a reality. And something has to be done for the medical community, the FDA, whoever is involved here, to recognize that and take the measures that are necessary to help these kids get the support and their parents and their families get the support that they need. We were in a vacuum of information back in those days. It was us, it was a couple of doctors and some wonderful nurses, and that's who we dealt with. We didn't know, we didn't fly off to the Mayo Clinic, we didn't fly off to California to get a second opinion. We assumed that these doctors knew what they were doing, that they were current, and they were very, very good. Very good. I mean, the surgeon that performed his surgery was, to do that sort of creative surgery and take a chance to do it was pretty dramatic.
And another thought, they would have known, my parents would have never known how my baby sister died, except for my dad wanted to know, and the baby had an autopsy. And that's the only way that they had, and that we were even aware that something can go wrong, I just took everything for granted, and we didn't restrict him from doing anything.
One of the things I think that is significant, our parenting approach with Paul was not to restrict him, not to tell him that he couldn't do things. Our parenting approach to Paul was to let him find the boundaries of his physical limitations. I'm sorry, but it's a miracle. It is Paul is a living, breathing, walking miracle. Medical science has done all they can. The faith that we've exercised and Paul has exercised, and many people know him, has been acknowledged by divine sources, and Paul is a living, breathing, walking miracle. And it's wonderful that he can use that sphere of influence that he has to advance the cause that he's so interested in.